in one of my first women's and gender studies classes where we broke down the dominant discourses that pervaded our culture. A lot of feminist theory was new to me then. Some of it was more obvious to me, such as learning about how men are supposed to be dominant, active in the world, the breadwinners of their nuclear family, and that women are supposed to be submissive, take care of the home and children. But one of them stuck out to me, and that was that women are liars. That sounded a little bit strange, and it took a few more examples for me to understand the implications of it. The example used in class was how people spend way more time talking about the implications of women falsely accusing men sexually assaulting them to try to ruin their reputation, which would make sense because everyone believes that women are liars. It's all part of the stereotype that women have superficial interests, talk too much, and ultimately lie anyways. So why listen to us? Today, I want to tell you about the instances of my life where I realized this stereotype of women being liars was at play. Some of these stories don't have happy endings. My trauma has been intertwined with this oppressive stereotype, and my owning my story is a revolutionary act. While I hope that one or several of these stories will stick with you enough that you might start to realize how this stereotype plays out around you, a big part of my telling these stories here today is in my personal healing and speaking my truth in a place where I know I'm more likely to be believed. I remember one of the first instances that I realized I wasn't being believed. When I was 17, I was in a long-term relationship with a man. Several years into the relationship, I remember a conversation where I said something, and it went mostly unacknowledged. After a moment, my boyfriend at the time essentially said the same thing I did. At that point, my father chimed in and responded as though he was hearing this thought for the first time. While my dad disregarding my voice like this was nothing new, that was the day that I realized that a huge part of that was because I'm a woman. In the several years that followed, every word that came out of my mouth continued to be disbelieved by my family until the day that I was leaving the front door and said that I would never be back. My father laughed. I haven't tried being heard by him since. So that happened before my class where I learned about the stereotype. The rest of the stories I'll tell you about happened even after I learned about the stereotype of women being liars. This was only the beginning of my having to worry about being believed when I was already telling the truth. I remember the first time I was sexually assaulted. I went to the cops and hoped that something would come out of my truth. Despite my saying no and trying relentlessly to run away from my assaulter, falling down the stairs in the process, the police officer said that I wasn't upset enough that my assaulter could have known that I was not consenting. He walked away with no charges. His name was Tim. I remember the second time I was sexually assaulted. Once again, I went to the cops and, remembering how I was wronged the first time, thought maybe if I insisted on my truth further, that maybe something would happen this time. Once again, the police officers defended my assaulter and said he couldn't have known he was doing something wrong. He walked away with no charges. I don't know his name. I remember the third time I was sexually assaulted. I decided to try speaking to my assaulter directly first. I met with him and told him why what happened was wrong. I tried explaining to him how I was too drunk to push him off of me, or move, or speak at all. He seemed remorseful. He even apologized. I didn't try going to the police. Months later, I heard through mutual friends that he convinced himself that he did nothing wrong, and he peddled the story that I made it all up. His name was Colton. I remember last summer, where my coworker tried to rape me, and because I successfully escaped him, I endured narcissistic abuse from him for the month that followed. They're still doing the paperwork on that, but based on my history with being believed, I'm not optimistic they'll do much. I remember the first time that I, as a driver, got into any kind of collision. It was a complicated story for another day. Essentially, despite my car being put into motion by a tow truck driver, my following his instructions resulted in my car sliding into his. A more debatable situation, and still I was deemed 100% at fault. I remember just a few weeks ago, I was going to traffic court, walking in thinking it would be an easy win because I was falsely accused of texting and driving. I was hoping that they might try to come up with some video footage, anything, so that they would realize they had the wrong car. I was disbelieved by the officer that day, and I was disbelieved by the court when I told the truth. And so I was falsely convicted of texting and driving. I've lost count of how many times my voice has gone hoarse, trying to be heard the way a man is heard when he just speaks. I've tried to be calm and assertive the way that a man is, and I've received work evaluations that have called me antisocial, inattentive, and basically downright unpleasant. The very same work reviews that insisted that I take up less space gave my male coworkers glowing reviews for taking up 100 times more space than me. Walking out of the courtroom, which, as I mentioned, was just a few weeks ago, I had this overwhelming thought of, how many times in my life have I told the blatant truth, even when the stakes are high, and been totally disbelieved? I had therapy shortly after, and I was absolutely crumbling from the weight of how many times I've had to worry if I sound truthful enough for literally telling the truth. Women are not liars. Women don't talk too much. I'm done making space for the people who won't hear me. I'll be truthful about myself, and I'll be truthful about what happened by the hand of those who have harmed me. We who have been disbelieved will come together. We will share our stories, and the world will stop forgiving those who harm us. The world will tell us that it is our job to carry the shame of what has happened to us. But being able to share our stories and believing each other, believing survivors, is a revolutionary act. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for listening.